On a mild autumn evening, October 25, 1994, a story began to unfold in the small town of Union, South Carolina that would soon grip the entire nation. A distressed young mother named Susan Smith, then 23, made a frantic phone call to the police. She reported a terrifying incident. A black man had forced her out of her car at a stoplight, then driven off with her 2 young sons still inside. The news of the abduction of 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alex Smith sparked immediate and widespread alarm. The image of the tearful mother pleading for the safe return of her children was broadcast across every major news network. The story resonated deeply with parents everywhere, and a massive search effort was launched, drawing in law enforcement agencies, volunteers, and concerned citizens from all over the country. For 9 agonizing days, the search for the missing boys dominated headlines. Susan Smith and her estranged husband David appeared on television, their faces etched with sorrow, begging the supposed kidnapper to bring their children home. The nation watched, prayed, and hoped for a miracle. Investigators followed every possible lead, and the community of Union rallied together, holding vigils and plastering missing person flyers on every available surface. The description of the alleged carjacker, however vague, fueled a sense of fear and suspicion. The search parties combed through fields and forests, their efforts growing more desperate with each passing day as the hope of finding Michael and Alex alive began to fade. The pressure on law enforcement was immense, but the case seemed to have stalled with no suspect and no sign of the car or the children. Behind the scenes, however, law enforcement officials were growing skeptical of Susan Smith's account. Investigators, including Sheriff Howard Wells, noticed inconsistencies in her story, and her emotional responses seemed at times unnatural. She failed multiple polygraph tests, raising significant red flags. The focus of the investigation slowly began to shift from a mysterious unknown assailant to the very person who had reported the crime. On November 3, 1994, after days of intense questioning and facing the mounting evidence against her, Susan Smith's carefully constructed narrative finally collapsed. She broke down and confessed to a truth that was far more disturbing than the fiction she had created. There was no carjacker, there never had been. The confession revealed a truly horrific act. Smith admitted that she had driven her Mazda protege to a boat ramp at John D. Long Lake. With her 2 little boys strapped securely into their car seats in the back, she got out of the vehicle, released the handbrake, and watched as it rolled down the ramp and into the dark, murky water. She stood by as the car carrying her children sank beneath the surface, disappearing from sight. Divers were immediately dispatched to the lake, and within hours, they located the vehicle submerged 18 feet below. Inside, they found the bodies of Michael and Alex, just as their mother had described. The nation, which had shared in her supposed grief, was now confronted with an incomprehensible betrayal. The mother who had cried for her sons on camera was, in fact, their killer. The trial of Susan Smith began in the summer of 1995, and it captured the world's attention, turning the Union County Courthouse into the epicenter of a national media event. The prosecution, led by solicitor Tommy Pope, presented a clear and chilling motive for the murders. They argued that Susan Smith had killed her children because they were an obstacle to her happiness. The main piece of evidence was a letter from her wealthy ex-boyfriend, Tom Findley, who had recently broken up with her. In the letter, Findley had stated that while he cared for her, he was not ready for the responsibility of a family and did not want children. The prosecution contended that Smith, desperate to reconcile with Findley, eliminated her sons in a cold and calculated act to clear the way for a future she coveted. The defense, led by prominent attorneys David Bruck and Judith Clark, did not dispute that Smith had killed her sons. Instead, they painted a portrait of a deeply troubled and mentally fragile woman who had been pushed to the breaking point. They argued that her actions were not the result of selfish calculation, but of profound depression and a history of severe trauma. The defense brought to light a dark past that included her father's suicide when she was just a child, and most shockingly, years of sexual abuse by her stepfather, Beverly Russell, who admitted to the abuse during the trial. They claimed that on the night of the drowning, Smith had intended to end her own life, planning a murder-suicide, but had lost her nerve at the last moment and stepped out of the car. Her life, they argued, was a cycle of pain that culminated in this tragic act. The jury, composed of 7 white and 5 black members, was tasked with weighing these two conflicting narratives. Was Susan Smith a cold-blooded killer who murdered her children for a man? Or was she a victim of her own tormented mind whose actions were driven by a lifetime of suffering? The prosecution pushed for the death penalty, arguing that the crime was so heinous and the deception so profound that it warranted the ultimate punishment. They emphasized the terror the 2 young boys must have felt in their final moments trapped in a sinking car. The defense, in contrast, pleaded for mercy, asking the jury to look beyond the horrific act itself and see the broken woman who committed it, a person they believed was not evil but mentally ill and deserving of life, not death. After listening to weeks of emotional and often disturbing testimony, the jury deliberated for only 2.5 hours before reaching a verdict. They found Susan Smith guilty of 2 counts of murder. The question then turned to her sentence. The community and much of the country were divided on whether she should receive the death penalty. In the end, the jury chose to spare her life. They sentenced Susan Smith to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving 30 years. The verdict brought her close to the legal proceedings, but did little to answer the lingering questions about how a mother could be capable of such a devastating act of violence against her own children, leaving a community and a nation to grapple with the shocking details of the case. The impact of Susan Smith's crime on the town of Union, South Carolina was immediate and profound. Her initial false accusation against a black man injected a dangerous element of racial tension into the community. For 9 days, an innocent and unidentified black man was the subject of a nationwide manhunt, a specter that played on one of the oldest and most destructive racial stereotypes in American history. This fabrication not only sent investigators on a wild goose chase, but also sowed seeds of fear and division within the town. When Smith's confession revealed the truth, the community's grief was compounded by a sense of shame and anger over the racial lie. In an effort to heal the rift, Smith's family publicly apologized to the black community during a town meeting organized to promote unity and reconciliation. Life in prison for Susan Smith has been far from quiet. Since her conviction in 1995, she has been housed at Leith Correctional Institution in Greenwood, South Carolina. Her time behind bars has been marked by a series of disciplinary infractions that have made headlines over the years. In 2000, it was revealed that she had engaged in sexual relationships with 2 different prison guards, both of whom were subsequently fired and faced criminal charges. These incidents raised serious questions about the security and oversight within the state's prison system. Further infractions followed, including reports of illegal drug use in 2010 and 2015, as well as a more recent violation in 2024 for unauthorized communication with a documentary filmmaker, which resulted in the loss of privileges like canteen and telephone access. As the 30th anniversary of her crime approached, the prospect of her release loomed. Smith became eligible for parole in November 2024, and her hearing was a moment of great significance for all those connected to the case. Her ex-husband, David Smith, the father of the 2 murdered boys, has remained a constant and vocal opponent of her release. He has spent decades ensuring that his sons, Michael and Alex, are not forgotten, and has steadfastly argued that their mother should remain in prison for the rest of her life. He, along with other family members and community representatives, prepared to face her at the parole hearing, ready to recount the pain her actions had caused and to argue that she still posed a danger to society. The hearing was a painful reminder of the tragedy for the entire community. On November 20th, 2024, Susan Smith, now 53 years old, appeared before the South Carolina Board of Paroles and Pardons. The outcome was decisive. After hearing emotional testimony from David Smith and more than a dozen other witnesses, the board unanimously denied her parole. The Office of Victim Services reported receiving over 350 messages regarding the hearing, with a vast majority strongly opposing her release. The board's decision ensures that she will remain incarcerated, though she will be eligible to apply for parole again in 2 years. For the family and the community of Union, the denial provided a measure of relief, reaffirming that the consequences of her actions 3 decades ago would continue to hold, keeping the woman who shook America behind bars. The Susan Smith case remains etched in the American consciousness more than 3 decades later for several powerful reasons. First and foremost is the sheer horror of the crime itself. The concept of filicide, a parent killing their own child, is one of society's ultimate taboos. The image of a mother methodically planning and executing the murder of her 2 helpless toddlers by drowning them is profoundly disturbing and defies our most basic understanding of parental love and protection. The tragic final moments of Michael and Alex, strapped into their car seats as water filled the vehicle, created an indelible and haunting image that continues to evoke a deep sense of sorrow and disbelief. This fundamental violation of the maternal bond is what makes the case a benchmark for unimaginable crimes. Furthermore, the case serves as a powerful study in deception and the manipulation of the media. For 9 days, Susan Smith performed the role of a grieving mother for a national audience. She used television to broadcast her fabricated story, skillfully playing on the public's sympathies and fears. Her ability to maintain this elaborate lie while a massive search was underway underscored the chillingly calculated nature of her actions. When the truth was revealed, it created a sense of collective betrayal. The public had invested its emotions in her plight, only to discover it was a monstrous charade. This aspect of the case became a cautionary tale about the dangers of rushing to judgment based on initial reports and the powerful, sometimes deceptive nature of televised grief. The racial component of Smith's lie also gives the case an enduring and troubling significance. By inventing a black carjacker, she tapped into a long and painful history of racial prejudice, where black men have been falsely accused of crimes, particularly against white women, often with devastating consequences. Her line not only misdirected a major police investigation, but also risked inciting racial violence and reinforced harmful stereotypes. The case is frequently cited in discussions about race and the justice system as a modern example of this dangerous dynamic. It stands as a stark reminder of how easily racial biases can be weaponized and the deep societal wounds they can inflict, a conversation that remains critically relevant in America today. Ultimately, the Susan Smith story endures because it forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of evil, mental illness, and justice. Was she a cold, narcissistic monster or a broken victim of trauma who snapped? Can a person who commits such an act ever be truly rehabilitated? The debate over her motivations and the appropriateness of her life sentence continues. Her recent parole hearing brought the case back into the spotlight, demonstrating that time has not diminished its power to shock and captivate. It remains a dark chapter in American crime history, a tragic narrative that serves as a permanent memorial to 2 little boys and a chilling reminder of the depths of human cruelty.